totalitarian, and they're both based upon two very, very questionable and not very peaceful concepts. One is the idea of a perfect human being, the Prophet Muhammad, and the other is the idea of a perfect book, the Quran, the recitations. Therefore, any challenge to this faith is bound to lead to heresy and to schism, and does. And just as all forms of absolutism and totalitarianism, leader worship and revealed truth, unalterable text, always do, because they can break, perhaps, but they cannot bend. And thus the latent potential of violence between them, among them, as well as within them, is very great. In which he ponders one very important question, the only one I've got time for now. What happened to the word Christendom? Remember, there used to be such a term. It used to extend across the world, and the hope is that it would extend even further. And it was unironically used to mean those areas of human civilization, and areas yet to be civilized, of course, where the word of Jesus Christ reigned or would reign. And it's all gone. The word is never used except historically or sarcastically now. And McCulloch doesn't say it ended because of the Crusades, though he could. It didn't. Crusades didn't kill it. Not because of slavery, mandated by Christianity. That didn't kill it either. Nor the mass murder of colonial subjects in the yet-to-be Christianized world. That wasn't sufficient. It didn't really end, he said, till 1914, when all the Christian empires of the world, Austria-Hungary, Germany, France, Britain, France is a slight exception to this, but only a slight one, and Russia, all of them commanded by Christian emperors and calling upon their subjects as Christians, went to war with each other and very nearly destroyed the whole human civilization, and certainly reduced it to a point where we can't guess where we might be if it hadn't been for this extraordinary outbreak of barbarism. And out of that came the terrors of fascism and of Stalinism, of which it was the seedbed as well. I mention this partly because I want to maintain that there's no such thing as a religion of peace by definition. And second, to point out, and that its best historian has to admit something that if I was a Christian would make me humiliated. But because there was another empire involved in that war, the Ottoman Empire, which also came to an end, its other name was the Caliphate, the Muslim Caliphate. It went to war on the side of German and Austrian imperialism and Hungarian imperialism, and it lost not just the war, having proclaimed a worldwide jihad against Christianity, except for German and Austrian and Hungarian Christianity, which were its allies. And it didn't just lose the war, but by 1924 had been dissolved by the Turkish leadership, by Ataturk. It lost the Caliphate. And that's the only one that still has supporters. The other Christian and religious empires have all gone. But the Caliphate still has fans, not just in the Muslim world, sometimes referred to by Muslims as the Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, but also in what some Muslims call the Dar al-Harb, the House of War, the part of the world that isn't yet Muslim. There are Caliphate clubs in London now and Berlin and elsewhere, quite important ones. And what I want to know is why that is and what we should think about it. Believers in this fantasy have, Laurie's spared me the need to say much of this, have committed extraordinary atrocities in Istanbul, in Madrid, in India, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, and of course in our own fair city. And the pretexts for it vary. They can be, the excuse for the mass murder can be that Australia has helped East Timor become independent from Indonesia. They can be that Newsweek has printed a false story about the desecration of a supposedly holy book. You never know what it's going to be next. But everyone knows to be careful about it, and everyone understands that the threat of violence that backs it is believable. And that's my opening position. Now you will say, I can hear it already being said, you may be saying it already to yourselves because the defense mechanisms kick in. And in any case, Laurie already said it for you. And I hope Professor Ramadan won't feel the need to say it again, but if he does, fair enough. You may say, that's not the real Islam. Those aren't real Muslims. Now, isn't that a fascinating objection? Is there anyone in this room, I exempt Professor Ramadan because it's his turn to speak next, is there anyone in this room who would care to arbitrate that question? Who is to say, where is the authority that defines who is a true son of the Prophet or true interpreter of his work? Part of the problem to begin with, and it's part of the problem because it is a religion, is that it's perfectly true to say we don't know who the true Muslims are. How right that is, who does speak for it. Only the second problem with defining Islam as peaceful, only the second problem with defining it as peaceful has to do with the fact that it's highly fissile and highly schismatic, that there is a civil war going on within it, the religion of peace. As we speak, at least one civil war between the votaries of this religion of peace is already taking place, and some of it is exported outside that world into ours, very salient fact. The first reason, though, is this. Islam makes very large claims for itself, very large claims indeed. It claims to be the last and final religion, the last and final revelation. When you see bumper stickers, everyone says you can't reduce major things to a bumper sticker. It's not my idea to have bumper stickers saying Islam is the solution. It's a well-known slogan, actually, of parties associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. They say Islam is the solution for everything. It takes care of all your life and the one to come. Sexuality, political economy, banking, diet, relations with other religions, everything. It's a total solution. What is creepy about the word total? I hope I don't have to tell an audience like this. It's the first 5 letters of the word totalitarian. It's absolute. It's absolute. It's all-inclusive. It's unanswerable. And oddly, for a religion that makes such large claims, notice another thing about Islam, it doesn't particularly like having these claims questioned or scrutinized. In other words, just as there is with all religions an inverse relationship between the claims they make and the evidence they can produce for them, you must have noticed that, with Islam, a younger religion, and perhaps therefore more in its first flush, there's an extraordinarily strong willingness to say that any challenge to its absolutist claims is by definition profane. And profanity and blasphemy can be the antecedent to very severe punishment, and often are, for Muslims and for non-Muslims. And this is not a road of peace in my submission. Thus my first point completed.
Hitchens is right to reject the idea of any religion of peace by definition. History shows that both Christendom and the Caliphate were political empires as much as spiritual ones, spreading influence through war, colonialism, and control over daily life. The fall of Christian empires after World War I didn't end religious imperialism. The Ottoman Caliphate was only dissolved in 1924, and yet the idea still inspires movements today that openly call for global religious rule. Islam, like Christianity in its imperial phase, makes sweeping claims that it is the final revelation, the ultimate solution to politics, economics, law, and morality. That's not just belief, that's a blueprint for totalitarianism. When a system declares itself complete and beyond question, dissent becomes heresy, and heresy becomes punishable, sometimes by death. This isn't hypothetical, from apostasy laws in countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran to violent reactions over cartoons or books. The pattern is clear. Any ideology that claims authority over every part of life, demands immunity from criticism, and enforces obedience with threats cannot honestly be described as peaceful. Peace requires the freedom to question without fear.
The claim to govern everything from hygiene to sex and the afterlife, which contains detailed prescriptions for the good and bad versions of itself, again strikes me as somewhat totalitarian, and they're both based upon two very, very questionable and not very peaceful concepts. One is the idea of a perfect human being, the Prophet Muhammad, and the other is the idea of a perfect book, the Quran, the recitation. Now, the category perfect human primate or mammal and the category flawless book that could possibly not use any kind of change, revision, or editing are categories that do not exist. There are no members of these categories. Therefore, any challenge to this faith is bound to lead to heresy and to schism, and does. And just as all forms of absolutism and totalitarianism, leader worship and revealed truth, unalterable text, always do, because they can break, perhaps, but they cannot bend. And thus the latent potential of violence between them, among them, as well as within them, is very great. And at any moment, someone is in danger of being accused of being an apostate or an unbeliever. This week, the Coptic Pope of Egypt, Pope Shenouda, who represents 10 million Egyptians, was hustled onto Egyptian TV. He's not asked on all that often. I don't think he was even asked on this time. I think he was told he'd better come on. Why is the leader of Egypt's huge Christian minority suddenly compelled to make a TV appearance? Because one of his bishops had said in an interview that he thought that some of the verses of the Quran showed signs of having been added later on and to have been later accretion. And Pope Shenouda was forced onto the television to say, it's not that that didn't happen, it's it couldn't have happened. It shouldn't even be discussed. So that it has to be claimed even by non-Muslim subjects of a Muslim state that there is, after all, because no Christian claims this about the Bible anymore, no Jew claims it about the Pentateuch. After all, yes, there is just one book that's completely word and letter perfect from the first time it was not even written down, but recited. Now, demands that you believe the impossible do not lead to peaceful outcomes. Nor do they lead to peaceful or tolerant regimes. And I'm not going to ask you which Muslim country you would like to live in. I don't know whether Professor Ramana will tell us which one he would pick if he had to, because I don't have to ask you a question like that, because it's already in your mind.
Can you wind up now?
Yes, I can. I can, yes, and will. Shall, in fact. Sexual repression doesn't lead to peace. The idea that women are inferior to men is a profound cause of unease, let's say the least of it. All religions make some form of this claim. Islam seems to make it less apologetically than most. Claims that the world will come to an end in an apocalyptic form, which will lead to the victory of one religion or another, are not peaceful either. It's possible, perhaps, I haven't exhausted all my remarks, that the endless teaching of battle stories to children and the stories of lethal feuds from 7th century Arabia don't lead to peace, or the forcing of children to memorize and retell such stories by rote doesn't lead to peace either. It's arguable that peace isn't attainable at all. It may be arguable in some forms that sometimes in places that religion isn't even desirable, but it will not come by the fanatical adoption of a man-made text and a man-made supreme leader. Nothing but war and tyranny has ever come from the adoption of formulae like these. The only way to moral and intellectual satisfaction, even temporary, perhaps only temporary, but of any kind at all, comes to those who are willing to take the great risk of thinking for themselves at all hazards and trying to share the benefits of that tolerance and that open-mindedness with others. And with that, for now, I'll rest my case. Thank you very much.
Hitchens is right. The idea of a flawless human and a flawless book has no precedent in reality. No person is morally perfect. Even Muhammad's own biography in Islamic sources records acts like ordering assassinations of critics and waging wars of expansion. No text is beyond revision. The Quran itself wasn't compiled until decades after Muhammad's death, and early manuscripts like the Sana'a palimpsest show textual variations. Yet Islamic orthodoxy treats questioning this as a crime, punishable by prison or death in countries from Pakistan to Iran. This isn't just history. In 2023, a man in Nigeria was sentenced to death for a WhatsApp message deemed blasphemous. And in Saudi Arabia, women have been jailed for tweeting criticism of religious policy. The belief that women are inherently inferior is codified in laws on inheritance, Quran 4:11, Testimony 2:282, and dress, fostering systemic inequality. Teaching children violent tales of 7th century battles as moral lessons ensures cycles of sectarian hatred, just as Bible-based justifications for slavery and holy war once did in Christianity.
When I got the question, of course, as a Muslim and as a believer, but as someone who is coming from within the realm of religions, it was quite clear that to put it that way was not the right question to ask. Is Islam a religion of peace, or is Christianity, or is Judaism, or is Buddhism a religion or a spirituality of peace? Doesn't mean anything for me. It's not the right question. It's not the accurate question. Not because I think that there is a good Islam and the right Islam, and there are people who are acting in the name of Islam who are not representing what Islam is. This is not my point. I never said that, by the way. But the point for me is really to try to deal with a phenomenon, with religion from within, and to try to understand the dynamics and to understand the trends and to understand the diversity. So just to essentialize one religion by saying it's all about war, it's all about peace, and even, said by George W. Bush, doesn't mean anything for me. So this is one point which is important. But religions, and all the religions, and Islam among all the other religions, are dealing with human beings. And if you deal with human beings, you deal with violence and you deal with peace. You deal with violence. Because human beings, by definition, have to do with violence. They have to deal with aggressivity, with wars. And to expect from a religion not to tackle the issue is just to dream of something which is not going to happen. All the spirituality, go for Buddhism or go for the Bhagavad Gita, you deal with violence. So this is it. Now, what is the answer coming from religions and from trends when it comes to violence and to peace? This is the right question for me. Do we have something which is coming and helping us to go towards peace? This is, for me, the right question. So now, once again, when I have people speaking from outside, and it's especially the case these days when it comes to Islam, is we speak about Islam and we speak about, something which is a religion that is perceived through one window or through one interpretation, and we very often take what is visible through the media. But Islam is as complex as Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism and Hinduism. It's a diversity of interpretations. Yes, you are right. The Quran is for the Muslims the very word of God. But many interpretations and many ways of dealing with the books. The problem is not the book, the problem is the reader. Is the way, no, we have only 10 minutes. So, this is why when, for example, you take a text, and you can do this with the Bible, with the Torah, the Gospels, it's always the same. Tell me the way you read, I will know what is in your mind, but not for sure what is in the text. And this is something which is the starting point of a serious discussion in theology. Because I don't like all these intellectuals and philosophers and even journalists. They are very keen on understanding the complexity of philosophies and the simplicity of religions. That's not right. And the one to blame sometimes are the religious people themselves, because the way they present their religion is something which is all of dream and hopes and not dealing with the reality, which is a complex reality. And this is where I think we have to come to a better understanding. So very often when I deal with such topics, I just have to start with the very beginning. We want to deal with the religion, let us speak about religious issues and religious understanding, not to avoid the starting to just to come to newspapers and headlines. It's not going to help us to understand religion just to go for what is happening in the world. Let us also understand the fundamentals and then come to some of the translation, the historical experiences. Because as much as you can speak about September 11, you can speak about the 16th century under the empire, the Ottoman Empire, which was a great civilization with a diversity, Christians and Jews and even non-believers working and living together. We are always speaking about Andalusia. But we can prove everything with history if we don't get a sense of what are the principles we are talking about. So, for example, coming from a religious viewpoint, I wouldn't say Islam is the religion of peace. I say Islam is a religion for human beings. It deals with peace and it deals with violence. And it helps the people to go from violence towards peace. It's a way towards peace, but it's not a peaceful reality, because we are not peaceful beings. We are all in tension. Just to get that inner peace in us, and this is the starting point of the Islamic philosophy of human being, is really to start with your own self. Look at your heart and tell me if you are at peace or you were at peace. Peace is a process through which you have, it's a process that you get at the end of a self-education. Educate yourself to get this inner peace. This is coming from the universal message of all the religions. You get this in Buddhism, before even speaking, or not even speaking about one God, but you get it in Judaism, you get it in Christianity. Educate yourself to get that peace. So you have to deal with your inner wars and tensions. So this is the way we have to deal with the issue about peace. And the starting point is spirituality. Why? Because at the end of the day, it's really something which is important. And this is the difference that you can find between Islam and the Greek tradition. If you come back to Socrates, Socrates was saying your body in itself is bad. And this is why you have the soul helping you to educate your body and to master your body. In Islam, there is nothing like that. Your body is not bad, is not good, and your soul is not bad, is not good. It depends on what you are going to make out of it. It's your responsibility because you are free. Your dignity is in your freedom, and you have to use your freedom to make it bad or to make it good. Take the good decision for your body, that's good. Make the bad decision, that's bad. So it's all a question of educating yourself with your own body. And it's exactly the same when it comes to the understanding of the world. So this way towards peace, it's based on education. It's based on a spiritual way of dealing with yourself. And you know what is the meaning of that? The very essence of what I'm trying to translate now is jihad. So this is something which is coming from the classical tradition. And once again, the classical tradition is helping us understand jihad is resist the bad to promote the good. And the bad is in yourself first. And then you will try to get the good. And to get the good is this inner peace. So jihad is not the way towards war, it's the way towards peace. Because you have, as a human being, intrinsically to deal with your inner wars and inner tensions. It's exactly the same in the world, that what we have to do, you will find something which is the will of God. What is the will of God? Diversity. He made you tribes and nations in order for you to know each other. But you know the risk of diversity? It could be lots of knowledge and potential wars. So you have to educate yourself to live with others and with this diversity to know each other. So you can look at Islam saying, you know what Islam claims? It's the last and final religion. It's not enough to end with this sentence. The most important thing is what Islam is saying about the other religions. That you have to remove them from the earth? No. He made you tribes and nations in order for you to know each other. So respect the Christians, respect the Jews, respect the people who were before you. So it's a call towards respect that you find also in the texts. So yes, you will have Muslims. They will take one dimension and interpret this as it is the final religion, we are not going to deal with all the others. But you cannot deny the fact that through history, Muslims, in many situations, in many historical situations, were dealing with this diversity, and we learned from the Middle Ages, and we learned from the Ottoman Empire that Muslims are able to deal with diversity and take from the Jewish tradition. Maimonides was speaking Arabic better than me. He was a Jew, and he was an intellectual, and he was a theologian, and he was dealing with respectful people. So all these Muslims were wrong Muslims because they didn't understand that the final religion should not listen to the first monotheistic tradition? That's not true. You cannot reduce this in such a way. It's too simplistic to represent what a religion is and what a history and a historical experience is. So this is for me something which has to do with the diversity that we have, that it's rooted in the Islamic tradition as well, in the classical tradition that we find it. So when you deal with diversity, know that you need to promote, and it's out of your personal education, mutual knowledge, to get respect. But you also have to deal sometimes with oppressors and people who are going to try to take over, and you have to resist. And this resistance, in order to reform the world for the better, is the very meaning of jihad. Now, once again, I will never deny the fact that some Muslims, some theologians, in history and now, are using some of the verses in a way which is, for me, unacceptable. And you know, I go even further than that. Just after September 11, when I was invited by Time, I came here and I was asked about this. I said, you know what, it's not only not good and not Islamic, it's anti-Islamic what they are doing. It's against my religion. It's against the principles. So I'm not saying this is the good religion and this is bad. I acknowledge the fact that they are interpreting the text in a way, but what I'm saying from where I am, from within my tradition, is this is anti-Islamic. This is not the right way to deal with the text. So you cannot reduce this into something which is, oh, the only right Muslims are the Muslims who are acting the way I believe Islam is, meaning bad.
Ramadan argues that no religion should be labeled entirely peaceful or violent, but this sidesteps the real issue. When a religion claims divine authority and demands obedience to its texts, it inevitably shapes laws, punishments, and moral codes. And those codes often violate universal human rights. In Islam, the Quran prescribes corporal punishments like flogging for fornication, 24.2, death for apostasy, Hadith, Sahih al-Bukhari, 9.84.57, and subjugation of non-Muslims under jizya tax, 929. Christianity's Bible carries its own moral failures, endorsing slavery, Ephesians 6:5, genocide, 1 Samuel 15:3, and eternal punishment for disbelief, Mark 16 mani 16 nimidam. Ramadan's appeal to diversity ignores that Islamic empires, including the Ottomans, imposed second-class dhimmi status on Jews and Christians, restricting property rights, dress, and worship. The coexistence he praises existed only under Islamic supremacy, not genuine equality. Likewise, Christian Europe's so-called tolerance during the Middle Ages still burned heretics and expelled Jews. The problem isn't misinterpretation. It's that the foundational texts contain both peaceful and violent commands, giving extremists theological ammunition. Hitchens' point stands. A perfect leader and an unalterable book create systems that can't reform without breaking. True peace isn't built by filtering ancient laws through modern PR. It's built when ideas, sacred or not, can be questioned without fear. What do you think? Can a religion whose holy texts endorse violence ever truly be a foundation for peace? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
My doctoral studies at the University of Birmingham, we came to have a warm affection for this country and her people, and I consider it a real joy and a delight to be here with you tonight. Thank you very much for coming. Now, in tonight's debate, I'm going to defend two basic contentions. First, there are good reasons to think that theism is true, and secondly, there are not comparably good reasons to think that atheism is true. Now, I'll leave it up to Dr. Atkins to present his arguments for atheism before I respond to them. In this opening speech, I want to sketch briefly 3 lines of evidence that weigh in favor of God's existence. As a professional philosopher, I think that God makes sense of a wide range of the data of human experience, including philosophical, scientific, moral, and historical considerations. Number 1, then, the origin of the universe. Have you ever asked yourself where the universe came from? Why anything at all exists rather than nothing? Did the universe have a beginning, or does it just go back and back forever? Typically, atheists have said that the universe is just eternal and uncaused. But there are good reasons, both philosophical and scientific, to call into question that assumption. Philosophically, the idea of an infinite past is very problematic. If the universe never had a beginning, that means that the number of past events in the history of the universe is infinite. But the real existence of an actually infinite number of things leads to metaphysical absurdities. To give just one example, suppose you had an actually infinite number of coins numbered 1, 2, 3, and so on to infinity. And suppose I took away all the odd-numbered coins. How many coins would you have left? Well, you'd still have all the even-numbered coins, or an infinity of coins. So, infinity minus infinity is infinity. But now suppose instead that I took away all the coins numbered greater than 3. Now how many coins would you have left? 3. So, infinity minus infinity is 3. In each case, I took away an identical number of coins from an identical number of coins and came up with contradictory results. In fact, you can subtract infinity from infinity and get any result, from 0 to infinity. For this reason, inverse operations like subtraction and division are simply prohibited in transfinite arithmetic. But in the real world in which we live, such a convention has no sway. Obviously, you can give away any coins that you want. Here's another example of the absurdity of an infinite past. Take the planets Jupiter and Saturn. Suppose that for every orbit that Saturn completes around the Sun, Jupiter completes 2. If Saturn has completed 10 orbits, Jupiter has completed 20. If Saturn has completed 1 trillion, Jupiter has completed 2 trillion. The longer they orbit, the further Saturn falls behind. If they continue to orbit forever, then they will approach a limit at which Saturn will be infinitely far behind Jupiter. But now turn the story around. Suppose that Jupiter and Saturn have been orbiting the Sun from eternity past. Now, which will have completed the most number of orbits? The correct mathematical answer is that the number of their orbits is identical. But that seems absurd. For the longer they orbit, the further the disparity between them grows. So how does the number of their orbits magically become identical just by making them orbit from eternity past? These and many other examples suggest that infinity is just an idea in your mind, not something that exists in reality. But that entails that since past events are not just ideas in your mind, but are real, the number of past events must be finite. Therefore, the series of past events can't go back and back forever. Rather, the universe must have begun to exist. This purely philosophical conclusion has been confirmed by remarkable discoveries in astronomy and astrophysics. We now have pretty strong evidence that the universe is not eternal in the past, but had an absolute beginning a finite time ago. In 2003, Arvind Borde, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin were able to prove that any universe which is on average in a state of cosmic expansion cannot be infinite in the past, but must have a past space-time boundary. What makes their proof so powerful is that it holds regardless of the physical description of the early universe. Because we don't yet have a quantum theory of gravity, we can't yet provide a physical description of the first split second of the universe. But
William Lane Craig opens by asking a question few want to touch. Why is there something rather than nothing? For him, both logic and science point to one answer. The universe had a beginning. and things that begin don't just pop into existence uncaused. He points to the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, which makes it clear, even if there are multiple universes, all signs still point to a starting line. No eternal past, no infinite timeline, just a beginning that demands an explanation. Peter Atkins, representing the atheist view, leans hard on science, suggesting that the universe could arise from nothing. But that nothing isn't really nothing. It's a quantum vacuum governed by laws, math, and energy. That's a something hiding behind a label. Of course, Craig doesn't let it slide. If the universe began, and that vacuum isn't truly nothing, then what triggered existence itself? You can sidestep the question. You can rename the problem. But at some point, you have to face it. Either everything came from absolutely nothing, or something beyond the universe started it all. Let's see where Atkins takes it from here.
I think we should agree that theism is the more plausible worldview.
Thank you, Professor Craig. Can I ask Professor Atkins now to give his opening presentation?
Thank you. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. My immediate task, of course, is to set up my stall, not to respond to Dr. Craig's arguments at this stage. That will come later, although, as you will see, some of my remarks now will in fact touch upon what he has just raised. In fact, my task is to bring you forward from the 11th century, where you've been immersed with considerable erudition for the past 20 minutes, and bring you into the 21st century, and to present arguments based on 1,000 years of increasing knowledge about the world. Dr. Craig would have been a wonderful medieval apologist, and it's a pleasure to hear his erudite reprise, with a few elaborations, of course, of what could have been said 1,000 years ago. I do not say that scornfully. Dr. Craig has touched on arguments that have long troubled thinkers, believers, and disbelievers alike, and their longevity underlines their importance to mankind. But first, an admission. I cannot prove that God does not exist. Everything there is could be the creation of an extraordinary entity that surpasses our understanding. It could be that the universe was created only a millisecond ago, with all our memories suddenly but falsely in place. It could be, as God is outside time, whatever that meaningless phrase means, that he hasn't decided even to make us yet. It's just conceivable that God did indeed create the universe 13.7 billion years ago. I cannot prove that he did not. All I can do is to assemble evidence that leads to the conclusion that God is not necessary for any aspect of the current world, and that there is a far simpler explanation for everything than the assertion of the existence of an omnipotent God. I have to say, of course, that many hold that the assertion that God made it is far, far simpler as an explanation of everything than a more pedestrian account in terms of physical laws. God, they say, is surely a simpler explanation than complex mechanism. Don't be seduced. The assertion that God did anything is simplistic rather than simple, and it is lazy. It is simplistic because an entity as functionally unbounded as a God must be of extraordinary complexity. It is lazy because it avoids becoming involved in untangling the web of events that have led to us. Any argument that simply asserts that God did it is a sign of a lazy mind, a mind that is content to wallow in assertion rather than embark upon climbing the intellectual Everest of comprehension. My argument against God is that there is nothing in the universe that cannot be explained in prospect at least, without invoking that complex hypothesis. In other words, there are simpler explanations, or at least the prospect of simpler explanations, for absolutely everything. Because there are simpler explanations, or the prospect of them, there is no need to burden our understanding with the assertion that there is something more, namely an incomprehensible God. That billions of people believe to the contrary is of no consequence. Truth is not arrived at by majority vote. There are clearly huge psychological and cultural pressures imposed on people from an early age, and belief has been honed by the powerful into a potent weapon of crowd control. In the nasty, brutish brevity of an impoverished life, great comfort comes from the belief that there is better to come. There is also satisfaction that wrongdoers, wealthy perhaps on earth, will get their comeuppance in the afterlife. Even the meek are in with a chance. Angst and hope, angst at the prospect of one's own annihilation, and hope for unbounded ecstasy to come, are potent drivers into the jaws of belief. But the potency of the drivers and the huge majority of the hoopers does not mean that the belief is correct. I've made a strong but carefully worded claim that there is nothing in the universe that cannot be explained or has the prospect of being explained without invoking a God. I need to justify that claim. If you accept my argument that a God is unnecessary, then your only recourse, if you insist on believing that there is a God, is to admit that you are driven by your heart rather than your head. But hearts are unreliable organs of knowledge. I shall deal with 6 points: contingency, fitness, purpose, miracles, including resurrections, theodicy, and morality. Obviously, and perhaps mercifully, I don't have time to be thorough on any of these topics, but perhaps by setting out the ground, we can turn to finer arguments later. In each case, I shall argue that modern science, the agent of the new Enlightenment, promises, I can offer no more than that, to elucidate what theology has long obscured. First, contingency. Science currently doesn't have the slightest clue about how a universe can come into existence out of absolutely nothing without intervention. I will leave aside whether the universal is eternal in some sense and without a beginning. That's something to be determined by observation, not by the ruminations of philosophy. We simply don't know. To make it harder for myself, I shall suppose for the sake of argument that there was a beginning. But there are 2 kinds of beginning, and it's important to distinguish them. One type of beginning is when an already existing universe gives rise to a daughter universe. Another type of a beginning is when absolutely nothing turns into a universe. I shall call that latter universe an original universe. Now, as you've just heard, some assert that a universe can spring from a quantum fluctuation. That may be true of a daughter universe, for an already existing mother universe has physical laws and a richly propertied vacuum. But when there is absolutely nothing, there are no physical laws, no quantum fluctuation. It's an empty term for the emergence of an original universe. And to make things harder for myself, but with an eye on trying to answer and not evade a deeply important question, I shall set aside the simpler problem of a daughter universe and consider the formation of an original universe. Did that original universe, although perhaps contingent, have to be caused? You have to realize that physical laws, which are summaries of observed behavior, come into existence as a universe comes into existence. That includes issues of causality. It is naive in the extreme to extrapolate our own experience of causality, which is essentially the working out of the consequences of physical laws, to an era before those laws existed. It is entirely possible that the unique event that marked the inception of the physical laws was itself an uncaused event. And what science has to do, in due course, is to discover how absolutely nothing can tumble into being and become apparently something. Is there any reason to believe that it might succeed? There's no doubt that it's actually edging towards that goal by burrowing back in time to discover that there was what there was immediately after the creation event. Look how far it has come in the past 100 years. We are starting to be confident about what first appeared.
Peter Atkins begins with a clear position. The existence of God cannot be disproven, but the concept is not required to explain the universe. His argument rests on the view that every observable phenomenon can, in principle, be understood through natural processes. There is no need to introduce a supernatural cause when the available tools of science already address the questions once reserved for theology. In physics, the origin of the universe is explored through models based on quantum field theory and general relativity. Physicists such as Edward Tryon, Alexander Vilenkin, and Alan Guth have developed frameworks in which a universe can emerge from a quantum vacuum. These models are grounded in established physical principles and published in peer-reviewed contexts. They examine conditions where space, time, matter, and energy do not yet exist in classical forms. The quantum vacuum in these models is not empty space, but a pre-geometric state governed by probabilistic fluctuations. It has no particles or fields in the classical sense, but it permits spontaneous events due to its underlying structure. This is not a speculative leap. It is derived from the mathematics used to describe quantum systems and is consistent with the theoretical foundations of modern cosmology. Experimental advancements continue to inform these models, including those from particle accelerators, satellite measurements of the cosmic microwave background, and high-precision gravitational data. Physical laws, in this view, are not prescriptive forces imposed from outside. They describe regularities that emerge as physical systems develop. The law-like behavior observed in nature reflects consistent patterns rather than imposed order. Causality, time, and space are not treated as eternal categories but as emergent properties tied to the structure of the system. Atkins also addresses ethics and human behavior. Moral norms, cooperation, and legal structures are developed through social interaction, negotiation, and institutional memory. These systems function through accountability, shared understanding, and revision, not through appeals to divine authority. Global studies show that societies without strong religious frameworks continue to build systems that address justice, welfare, and civil order through public mechanisms. Historically, many institutions that shape human rights, medicine, and law have emerged through empirical inquiry and political struggle, rather than from sacred texts. Legislative assemblies, universities, courts, and scientific academies operate through transparent procedures and ongoing correction. Changes in legal rights, bodily autonomy, and freedom of expression were often developed through public debate, not religious mandate.
I'd like to perhaps paraphrase a remark by the economist J.K. Galbraith, who said that astrology was invented in order to make economic forecasting look respectable. I'd like to say that theology was invented to make philosophy look respectable. You've heard nothing but obfuscation. Let me remind you, because I have to, my first rebuttal refers to the first 20 minutes of Dr. Craig's presentation, rather than his immediate one. The level of argument that we heard relating to the eternal nature of the universe. It was that planets clearly have not been going round the sun an infinite number of times. I shorten the rather ludicrous argument that we actually heard. No one ever says that. He's raised a straw man. What we're really concerned about is whether the universe itself is infinite. And we can measure the life of the solar system as about 5 billion years. We can measure the life of the universe as 13.7 billion years. We weren't talking about that at all. We were talking about whether the sequence of universes might be infinite and that there was never actually a beginning. You cannot argue against that by philosophy. You cannot argue against that by theology. The only way you can argue about it is by looking at the evidence, and we heard no evidence whatsoever. And arguments about infinity are always extraordinarily doubtful. I mean, Professor Craig said that an infinite number of events has never occurred in the universe. I refer him to Zeno, halving the distance again, never getting anywhere. But clearly, if you've got an infinite number of halving of the distances, you get anywhere you want to. So never listen to an argument about infinity. It's infinitely slippery. The travesty of my remarks about nothing coming from nothing. Let me take that as an example. What I wanted to show is that science is circumspect in the way that it approaches the great questions of being. Okay, it looks around, and if you're a naive looker arounder, a philosopher, a theologian, a gardener, a farmer, you will see a huge amount of energy in the universe, and you will marvel at God's bounty. But then, as a scientist, you think again, and you say, yes, I can measure the amount of energy in the universe. I won't just lie back and think about it. I will measure it, because once I put numbers to ideas, they become testable and verifiable. And to determine the energy of the universe, the first thing I do is to weigh it. So I weigh the mass, I determine the mass of a galaxy, and then I multiply it by the square of the speed of light. And through E equals mc squared, I get the energy that that galaxy represents. I do it for this galaxy, that galaxy, this galaxy, every galaxy in the universe, not just the ones we can see. And I get a colossal value. And I lie back and wonder at God's munificence. And then I say, but I've forgotten something, which is the gravitational attraction between galaxies. And whenever you have two attracting bodies, they lower their energy. And if you take the gravitational attraction of this galaxy with that one, it lowers that first sum we got a little bit. Then this galaxy with that one, this galaxy with that one, this galaxy with that one. And the signs are, and we're not completely certain about this, because we do not jump to conclusions in science. We are circumspect, imaginative, and honest. We find that that gravitational attraction reduces that original huge energy we had to zero. In other words, God's munificence was zero. And you don't need a God if the God isn't going to give you anything. What science does is to simplify the questions that need to be answered. It doesn't say, there was nothing originally, there's nothing now. What it does is to simplify the question that needs to be asked. We're moving cautiously, imaginatively, and reliably to understanding the incipience of the universe by identifying what questions truly have to be answered. There is nothing here, I will concede that, but it's an extremely interesting form of nothing. There was nothing originally. There is nothing here now, but it's through whatever event took place at the inception of the universe, it became an interesting form of nothing, which seems to be something. It may be metaphysical, and it may sound stupid, But what I'm doing is identifying the question that needs to be answered, not just sitting back in awe and saying, look at the universe, fantastic job, it obviously needed someone really rather special to do it. The resurrection, if I can jump forward, I do notice that Professor Craig, although I made 6 points, did not deal with all 6. Perhaps I should deal with all 3 of his. His second, of course, was the objectivity of moral values. To say that you cannot be moral without a God is frankly disgusting. I am moral. I do not believe that I am guided by a God. And I think it casts a slur on atheists everywhere in the world to presume that they are evil because they believe there is no God. Morals, as I asserted in my opening presentation, the emergence of morals should be understood. They should not simply be accepted. You should try to find the roots of moral behavior, hard as it is to trace the emergence of moral thinking as one's own body begins at 1 cell and turns into 1 trillion cells as evolution proceeds through billions of years, as people begin to think about the consequences of their actions. That's the way to understand morality, not just to lie back and think that there is an umpire in the sky somewhere. Try to understand. All I'm saying is that it is healthier to understand. If Voltaire said in one of my favorite quotations that people who believe in absurdities commit atrocities. And I think we see that in religious belief, where atrocities are affected in the name of dogma. The resurrection, I must deal with that in miracles. Of course, David Hume got it right when he said that there's always more reason to disbelieve the report than there is to believe what is reported. Look at the Gospels. You can't really believe it. Pretend we were writing about events 60 years ago when there was no actual real record. We wouldn't get it right. We'd make up a lot of it. The Gospels are political propaganda sheets. And it's inevitable and understandable that they were invented to make the point that they were trying to make. Yes, Joshua, if he existed, Jesus, I suppose you might call him, and I can well believe that in the Palestine of 2,000 years ago, there were lots of Joshuas around, that was probably a very nice man, and was certainly written up to be a very nice man by the people compiling the Gospels to establish the creed that they wanted to. But the actual evidence is extremely slender. The evidence in favor of an actual resurrection is compiled by those who start from a prejudicial point of view that it did occur and then seek to justify it. Others, those who deny the resurrection, say, this is such an extraordinary event, we need real extraordinary evidence to support it. And there is no real extraordinary evidence to support it. So why should you believe it? Because you can see that it was invented as a political manifesto? No, you cannot possibly believe it. And all this gibberish about having to justify atheism, I mean, that's another example of false premise. If I come into a room and say, I don't understand anything, I will start from the simplest explanation, and I will let you convince me.
Peter Atkins lays out 2 key points, both grounded in what science and history actually show. First, the claim that the universe requires a divine beginning doesn't match how cosmology works. Physicists like Edward Tryon and Alexander Vilenkin have developed models showing that a universe can emerge from a quantum vacuum, a state with no classical matter, space, or time. This isn't a loophole. It's a real possibility supported by quantum field theory, the same framework that underpins much of modern physics. In this framework, the total energy of the universe, once gravitational effects are included, may balance to zero. If that's the case, then the question of where the energy came from doesn't even need to be asked. There's no debt, no transaction, just a starting point that unfolds through known physical principles. Second, morality doesn't require belief in a deity to exist or to function. Human behavior, cooperation, and ethical reasoning can be traced through evolution, social dynamics, and shared experience. Data from Pew and Gallup show that people in non-religious societies still support justice, fairness, and care for others. Atkins doesn't reject meaning or mystery. He rejects the idea that those things need to be filled with untestable claims. When it comes to miracles like the resurrection, the same principle applies. Claims that break natural patterns require more than tradition. They need evidence. Where do you stand? Do you think morality depends on religion? Or can we shape ethics and compassion without it? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If this gave you ideas, be sure to like, subscribe, and share to keep the conversation going.